Welcome to Discover Week 4. We read through our group rules first. Respect the privacy of others. What's said here stays here. We are not here to fix one another, so please don't offer advice during group. Number 3, no crosstalk. We are all here in one group. Make a date to chat more with someone one-on-one privately if you'd like to talk more. Number 4, if you want to share, please use the mic and limit sharing time when contributing. So when I get finished going through the notes, there will be a time set aside where we can all share, ask questions, whatever you want to say, and those will be cut from when we actually post this live stream. But we do ask that you use the mic so that everybody can hear, because everybody has such great things to say and ask, and so we want everybody to hear that. So week 4, we are on step 4, and if we were to put step 4 into one word, it would be the lists, inventory. That's what it is. Step 4 is all about inventory. Not even creating, just acknowledging your archaeology that you already have. The parts that you're aware of is really what we're doing. So AA's step 4 says this: made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Our step 4 says we list our angers, fears, sexual history, and hurts that we have given and taken as we are able. This step is typically where people stop. If you've been through a 12-step system or program before, then you probably got to step 4 and you're like, okay, yeah, I'm really kind of motivated to do this, but then you might have stopped because it seems very overwhelming, especially if you were in a recovery system where they really pressurized your inventory and said, like, you have to have this much done by this date, and it really became like law to you. It made you feel like another thing to do, kind of in a season when you kind of don't have the energy to do some things, especially where emotional bandwidth is needed. So this is one of the steps. There are actually 2 steps that are the most common that people stop, and it's 4 and 9. So step 4 is where people usually stop. It seems overwhelming, and in some ways it actually is, and that's not a bad thing. It's not overwhelming for God, and that's who is really doing something with whatever we are able to write down. Actually, handwriting these lists is vital. So I know we all have our devices and ways that we can type things out, and it's very efficient. And if you just must do it that way, do it. But I beg you to do it by hand, because there is something therapeutic that God does with that. I cannot explain it. I'm not even going to try. Just trust me that really works. This is actually a handwriting experiment to some degree for you. There is power in writing these parts of our archaeology out. So write it out. In John Zoll's book, Grace and Addiction, which if you don't have this, I plug it every week. I completely recommend this as one of the top resources for the 12 steps. He is an Episcopal priest. He is also a recovering alcoholic, and he wrote this book several years ago from the perspective of being an alcoholic and a great theologian. So his book is a treasure to me, and I've used it, as you can see, religiously. In here, he has an example of, for inventory, what it is like. If I had a bruise on my arm, but I didn't know it, and Beth walked up to me from behind and goes, "Hey, Stacie," and I go, "Oh," and because she pushed the bruise. That's kind of what you're doing, in a sense, in some of these things that you're going to list on your inventory. It may feel like a bruise that you didn't really realize is there is being pushed to some degree. And that's not a bad thing. It reminds you something is there, and I need to be aware of it. It doesn't mean that you can fix it. You're not the healer, but it makes you aware of something that is there that is painful when it's actually touched or manipulated at all. So pushing the bruise is part of recovery. That's part of our whole entire process. that we just continue to go through, even if you're unaware of it. There's always some impasse that we get to where we kind of have to address something that hurts. And like, oh, I don't want to deal, it hurts too much. I can't deal with it right now. But then eventually, we need to be able to get to a place that we deal with it. And God is the one that gets us to that place. So pushing the bruise is part of recovery. Ignoring the bruises don't negate their presence, right? So even if we ignore a toothache or some other ailment that we have, our symptoms may subside, but it doesn't mean that it negates the fact that that issue is there, right? Like it's still there. This is the place where the waters muddy the most. So expect the murkiness. In the very first week when we talked about muddy waters and what those are, and if we pictured our lives, especially if they're kind of in a state of seeming controlled, a controlled climate, and we feel pretty calm in most areas of our life, it would look like most of the water on top of the surface, maybe to 6 inches down, before we reach the bottom, it's kind of clear. But then there's like this layer of silt at the bottom. And what we have been doing is walking around in that. And when you do inventory, it really stirs that. It's like shaking it all up. And the water is not clear anymore in any sense, in any spot. So it really muddies the water. Even if you're thinking about an issue that is over here and it's a fear, it muddies the water in every way. So expect those muddy waters. I would say don't be afraid of them, but you're going to be afraid of them anyway. But what I would say is you don't have to be afraid of them because it's part of the process. You have to have this moment of darkness to actually gain some clarity, which sounds like an oxymoron, but that's how God works. Most often, He allows us to get to dark places, to feel something really heavy, to see it for what it really is. And there He is in those things. So expect the murkiness. And when you feel afraid of that, ask God to help you to just be in it and trust that He's there with you. These lists, there are 5 of them that all of you have. These lists will help us identify patterns, pains, potholes, and the people in our lives that contribute to our anger, our fears, our sexual histories, our hurts, and overall archaeologies. So list 1, the first list is our anger list. Who are you mad at? Who do you have a grudge against? Who do you have a problem with? Who do you not like? Have you had an argument or fight with someone recently? If you had to fill in this blank. When blank is mentioned, I get so angry. Is there a person that you could fill in that blank with? And is it visibly angry, or is it just internally and nobody else knows about it? But like that person's name is said, I get set off. We are typically angry because people or institutions, it's not just people, but institutions either do something or they are a certain way that angers us. There are typically between 5 to 20 people we are harboring anger against in general. Generally, most people are harboring 5 to 20 people. The substance abuse addict usually has dozens more. People you spend the most time with have a greater chance at being on your list. You can be angry at someone you love. So try not to let your love for someone hinder you from adding them to the list. You may go, well, I am angry at this person, but I love them. So I don't want to add them to the list because I love them. Doesn't matter. You add them to the list. Where you are angry, who you are angry at, what you are angry at. It doesn't matter if it's rational, irrational, makes sense, has been validated. Doesn't matter. If you are angered by someone or something, you add it to the list. Can I have a copy of the list? I forgot to bring one up here. Thank you, Beth. I didn't really want to take yours, but on our list, on our anger list, it's very simple, and we want to keep these lists simplified because this is not a writing exercise in that you're writing at length about stuff. We are simplifying this archaeology. So your anger list has 2 columns. People I am angry with, institutions I am angry at. And then afterwards, it says after you've made a list, take each name on the list, so each institution or person, and ask yourself, what is my part? How have I contributed to the battle with this person or institution? If you have, if in fact you have, and if in fact there is something in you that feels compelled to actually admit that. Am I adverse to forgiving this person or this institution? Why? These are some diagnostic questions to ask yourself once you've made the list. So these are just names. You don't have to write anything else. You don't have to write the reason why you're angry at them. You know what it is. So you just write the name. If it's mom, dad, sister, coworker, friend, whatever. If it's over here, if it's the government, the IRS, the church, it could be anything. So after you make the list, then we want to ask, what is my part? How have I contributed to the battle with this person or institution? Am I averse to forgiving this person? Why? And one of the big things is, even if you don't get as far as that, ask God to address your anger directly so that you would become free of it. So that's one of the big things. Now I want to read something real quick out of John Zoll's book, because there's like some of my favorite stories he has are in the Step 4 chapter. And what he says, first of all, about inventory, which is so important, and I think is a very easy thing to relate to. When he's talking about inventory as a whole, all your lists. Picture dirty dishes piled up in the sink, overflowing laundry baskets, piles of old mail, dirty carpet, dust on the ceiling fan blades, burnt out light bulbs in the light fixtures, and cobwebs in the corners. Maybe there are socks on the floor and other items strewn about. Add to this a basement full of abandoned projects and an attic stuffed to the gills with long-forgotten possessions. And then there are the bathrooms. Yuck. This house needs to be clean. So AA would suggest that most people's lives require the same sort of upkeep. So when you think about your archaeology, most of us have not spent any time ever organizing any of it. So it is like a dirty house, an attic stuffed with stuff we've just kind of put up there and we've just forgotten about it. We don't even know what's up there, right? We've kind of talked about this before. And so that visual helps me think about, maybe I have a couple closets organized, maybe my one room or two is like nice and neat, but I still haven't gotten over here to this room. I haven't gotten over here, back down to the basement. I've done the attic, I haven't done the basement yet. And that's okay. You can't, as you know, if you had a really big house, that it's unlikely that you would be able to clean it from top to bottom and organize it from top to bottom, inside out, just like that. It would take some effort and energy, and it would take tools to do that. So the same is true for your own personal archaeologies, these lists that we're talking about. And so you want to make room for that for yourself. Give yourself grace in that to go about it at the pace that God has you to go about. And so the other thing he says, which is so funny, one of the funniest stories. One helpful rule of thumb here is the more time you have spent with a person, the greater chance that they are harboring anger against them. So don't forget parents, spouses, kids, coworkers. So he says, I remember one individual in AA who showed me a list, just his anger list, with over 900 names on it. It was pages and pages of names, the kind of extreme behavior that alcoholics are known for. I wondered if he would ever be able to finish his inventory. We started to look through it together, and I immediately noticed multiple repeats. He had his mom on there about 12 times, and many other individuals were listed multiple times. I remember asking him, "How many Dianes do you know?" Together, we were able to boil his list down to a much more manageable, though still somewhat unwieldy, 250 resentments. So 250 people on his list from 900. At one point, while looking at his section on institutions, I asked him, "It says here that you resent communism. Is that true? Do you really have a resentment toward communism?" He replied, "I guess not." And so we crossed it off the list. I then asked him, "What about capitalism? Is that a big red button topic for you too?" Again, he said, "No," and we crossed it off the list. Finally, I asked, "What about Subaru? It says here that you resent Subaru. Do you really resent Subaru?" He looked at me with fire in his eyes and responded, "Big time." Subaru stayed on the list, and we went from there. So most non-alcoholics, like I said, don't err in this direction. They don't have as many names on the list. But typically, people who are not alcoholics are more reluctant to acknowledge their resentments because it makes them uncomfortable. So where the alcoholic or the addict may be extreme in making a list initially of 900 with many repeated things, and maybe things that really they're not actually angry with, like capitalism and communism, but on the flip side of that, somebody maybe who is not a substance abuse addict may avoid putting things on the list because it makes them uncomfortable. So just be aware, those are good things to be aware of because it can help you kind of go, am I not putting some people or some places or institutions on the list because it makes me uncomfortable that that person or that place is on the list? Is that, what is that? Just put it on the list. If you even think for a half a second, I think I'm angry at that, just put it on the list. If you instinctively come up with somebody or a place, put it on the list. It's better just to have it on the list than to leave it off. If it comes to mind, if God brings it to the surface, then it probably needs to be on the list. And you'll get a chance later, like he was going through this list with this guy. So he helped question some of those people and things like, let's talk about that one a little bit. Let's talk about Subaru. So that is your anger list. The list 2 is the fear list. What are you scared of? What do your fears cause you to do or not do? What do they cause you to avoid doing? How well are your methods for dealing with fear working? Are your fears rational or irrational? In what ways do you compensate for your fears? Where and how do your fears hinder your health, your career, or your relationships? Where fear is present, a great need to control is also. If you have not thought about that particular truth, insert your own fear about something. I have a fear for, is that a place of control I wish I had? Like I feared this happening, or fear seeing this person, or I feared this thing at work, personally, professionally. So where fear is present, a great need to control is also. Usually where there's fear, there's a place that we would like to control something. If you were to fear like a parent dying of cancer or some horrible disease, we're unable to control their health. We're unable to control that they live longer, healthier lives. Like that all of our fears are not irrational, and they're not bad in the sense that, I would want my parent to live longer, or I don't want this bad thing to happen. It's a valid fear. But if that fear is causing us then to try to exercise that control over something or a situation, like how is that, are we engaging with people or an issue in our lives, like in an unhealthy way, because that fear is so strong, because we want to be able to control it so much, or we're avoiding it. So I'm not even going to see my mom because I don't want to face that she's dying. I don't want to see that she's sick. So, what are we doing? Are we avoiding stuff? Are we engaging in stuff because we have a fear of like, well, if I don't say yes, then they're not going to like me, or they're going to reject me. So it can make us do things, our fear can make us do things that we shouldn't, or avoid things that we shouldn't. So what is it doing? Where is our fear and our need to control? Where is that kind of the same? To the extent that we can't control something that we don't like, we fear it. That's a quote from John Saul. Fear is just like every other problem. It's proof of the need for God's help and rescue. So on your fear list, when we look at that, it's also very simple. It's just 2 columns. It says, fears I have. It could be spiders. It could be commitment. It could be getting fired, being homeless, whatever. Our fears are endless. There's no wrong answer here. What you fear should be on this list. If you have a fear of spiders, over here, behaviors, patterns, and consequences of this fear. Because I'm scared of spiders, what's a behavior, pattern, or a consequence? Like if I see any, do I overspray my home for bugs? Do I, I won't go on camping trips or go outside, or I won't work in the yard, or like what do I do? I mean, we have patterns and behaviors, and there's consequences. Well, now I've missed trips because I'm so scared of spiders, I won't go to these trips or whatever. Now that's like it's sounding, like a silly little fear, but some people really have that fear, and it controls a lot of their life and what they do or they don't do. So where you list a fear, for you to acknowledge what behavior, pattern, or consequence that fear has given you. Like now I do this because of that fear. That's what we're trying to get to. That's what you want to know about yourself. That's the awareness that we want to go, okay, like I get it now. I didn't even realize that. And it may take you some time to think about, I know I'm afraid of this, and I write it down. But it might take me a while to write a behavior or a pattern or a consequence, because you might have to think about it for a little bit. And that's okay. Once you get finished, we ask God to remove our fears so that we would be directed towards trust in Him. Because ultimately, fear is about not trusting God with whatever it is, right? And it doesn't mean that if it's an irrational fear, like I'm afraid of being abducted by aliens or something like that. Like where somebody's like, okay, Stacie, that's crazy. Like, I mean, come on. That's kind of irrational. But I mean, could it happen? No. It doesn't matter if you think it's irrational, or if it actually is irrational, or if somebody else thinks it's irrational. That's irrelevant. You write it down. Your fear is your fear, period. So we validate it and we acknowledge it. We don't put fears that other people have said, that's a rational fear and you should have it, so you should write that down. That's not what we're doing. We're writing down what's actually true about us. I'm fearful of this thing. I'm fearful of growing old. I'm fearful of my hair turning gray or going bald, or, people are afraid of all kinds of things. So write those down. Even if they seem tiny and irrelevant, write them down, because part of this is we're looking at patterns, right? Like about ourselves. And once you have these different lists filled out to the degree that you're able, you're going to be able to go look at your list of anger, of fear, of your sexual history, of your hurts given and taken, and you're going to start to see like where these connect and why they like, whoa, like, oh my gosh, like I had no idea that this was like so common through my life and like so prevalent. But look, there it is. There's the connecting dots. This is why I always kind of gravitate towards these kind of circumstances or situations or people, or, we have patterns. It's good for us to know why they exist, good ones and bad ones. So that's the fear list. John Zoll has one story in here, which is a short one, but it's also very good and can be attributed to anybody. And I just think really smart to look at it this way. And he said, so John Zoll lived in Charleston, South Carolina at one point. And he and his wife would have a giant Easter brunch every year. And he's an Episcopal priest, so Easter is like the pinnacle of the calendar year. And he would go hand deliver these very special invitations to invite people, to his neighbors, to invite them to come to the brunch. And so he was headed down the street to go hand off an invitation and to say hello to this couple that lived in their neighborhood. He says, I climbed their steps and rang their doorbell. Just behind the door, I could hear the sound of their television. In response to the bell, their dogs began barking and gathered in the foyer, but nobody came to the door. We've been in this situation before, haven't we? I rang the bell again and shouted, hey y'all, it's your neighbor, John. Just wanted to drop off an invitation. Still no answer. But I could see the couple's shoes huddled together on the living room coffee table, frozen through the blinds. I tried the bell again with no luck, and eventually left the invitation in the mailbox. It occurred to me as I walked home that they had once mentioned that a neighborhood fellow had knocked on their door, entreating them to give him some money. They had mentioned that in response, they no longer opened their door to unexpected strangers. While I in no way fit into that category, their fear had categorized me as a threat. I had come bearing good news, warmth, and an invitation to a party, but they could not receive my call. This story illustrates the impact that fear has upon a life. It blocks out possibility. It stifles the unanticipated, even in the case of good. It ascribes a negative value to unknowns, which are as much a fact of life, if not more so, than the things of which we are certain. So, such a great lesson, very harmful example that he gave, but how many times have we experienced something that caused some measure of like, well, I'm never doing that again, and so then we avoid any possibility of an unknown that could be something like an invitation to a party, but we're so scared because of something that has happened before. So think about that when you're making your fear list, working through that. Our third list is our sex list. It's our sexual history. It's not just a list of sexual partners. That's not what this list is, although that list will have that on it. And we all have a sexual history. Every single one of us in here. Children have sexual histories. Like they have been taught something about sex and sexuality. Like I have told this story before, but the earliest memory I remember of like my sexuality, even though I didn't really know that that's what it was at the time, was like I was riding my bike and I started my period, and I didn't know what that was because my mom had not told me that I would have a period, and so I thought I was dying, and so I really didn't know what to do, and I went home and like told my mom, and then she kind of freaked out because she didn't know what to do, and like my aunts and my grandmother come in, and so, but it was just like, so sex and sexuality was not explained to me in a way that was, for lack of a better term, just healthy. And there was no ease of talking about it. Sex is something you don't do, you stay away from it, it's for married people, and it's bad, and you don't think about it. So there was nothing to prepare me for sexual urges I might have. Why do I want to kiss a boy in my class? Why do I want to hold his hand? Why do I get a little all verklempt when I see him? Like, these things that are going to happen naturally, which have nothing to do with being a Christian or not a Christian. But you add being a Christian to that, and I grew up in the purity culture where it's like, you can't, it's pushed on you to be perfectly pure sexually. And so I can't tell you the pressure that I personally lived through with that, and not knowing how to even address my own like urges and just like the fact that I kissed a boy and that I had sex when I was a junior in high school and like all of those things, the shame that goes along with that kind of, that whole framework, instead of having sex described to me as this beautiful thing that God has made and why he made it. And because it actually is this beautiful picture and it's this amazing gift to us as humans. But that was not explained to me. So on my sexual history, there are moments where I have experienced something in the realm of, if it's an umbrella of sexual history. I remember going into my grandparents' bathroom, and I was in 7th and 8th grade, and my grandfather had like a stack of Playboys by the toilet. And I just was like, you know, like at the time I was like, I don't think that's a big deal. But then over time, I'm like, I think it was a big deal. It was a problem. You know what I mean? So just all the, you know, what did you learn about rated R movies? Like, you know, you can't watch that. Why? Like, what was the, you know, what is it? There's something about, you know, this is how girls are. This is how boys are. Our sexuality is broken. Sex is broken. We live in a broken world. That means sex is broken too in this world. It means our sexuality is broken in this world. So, and, you know, according to therapists, sexual baggage makes up a huge percentage of the root to some persistent emotions, patterns, and pains that we experience daily. If you really get down to the nitty-gritty of some of your you know, persistent emotions and patterns and pains, there's some sort of sexual baggage, which doesn't have to mean an encounter. It just may mean a way of thinking about those things, about sex or sexuality. It doesn't even mean an actual physical encounter with anybody. It doesn't have to include that. Our sexual baggage is all of that under that umbrella, right? It's not just encounters, sex encounters. Since the Garden of Eden, like everything else in us and around us, sex and sexuality is broken, it's faulty, it's distorted, it's misused, it's misunderstood by us and in us. Like, that's in our DNA when we come into this world. We come into the world faulty. We covered that in step one, right? We are depraved. It's total depravity. If we're Christian and we believe in that, that's how we're born. We have faulty thinking, and that includes our thinking about sex or our sexuality. So to take inventory of our sexual history matters because of the level of influence, compromise, and damage that has been done to us and we have done to ourselves and others in our misuse and mistreatment of our sexuality and sex itself. It also reveals distorted areas of identity. Like, you know, even growing up as a girl, like we don't even realize, like as a female, how much sexuality is thrust on us from the get-go. Like, I'm all for something pink. Give me something pink. I love it. But, like, why is that, you know, why do we just go to the lengths that we do to dress baby girls in everything pink? And does that make her think she can never like a different color? Like, what if black is her favorite color? I don't know. You know, like, what is the deal? We distort some of our sexuality and just the rules of that so much. We don't often see, like, how it can shape us. Well, I don't like to wear dresses. I don't like to wear heels, but I'm a girl. I'm an athlete. I grew up as an athlete. Well, you're a tomboy. Well, what does that mean? Is that less feminine than just a girl? Like, what does that mean? Like, there are so many of these common things that shape the way we see ourselves and then the way we, you know, portray ourselves to the world because of things under that umbrella of sexual history that have to do with sex and sexuality. Right? Like, I have talked to many women. I myself have found validation in, like, that boy likes me. Or I could get him to kiss me. Or I could get him to have sex with me. That means that I'm actually liked and I have some value. That is about the most unhealthy measure of value that I could have ever placed on myself. But I did it nonetheless. Why? Why did that happen? Why does that happen all the time? Right? Why does that happen? So on your sexual history list, when you look at it, it has 4 columns. So you put the name of a person, if it's a person you've had sex with. If you don't remember, because maybe it was a one-night stand, or you don't want to say the real name, but his name's Joe. So you put the name of whatever it is. It could be, like I mentioned, like the Playboys stacked by the toilet in my grandparents. So that, I wouldn't have necessarily a name. I'd put like Playboys. Why did this sexual encounter occur with this person? Well, mine wasn't with a person. Did I use sex with this person to get or gain something? It's a big question. What did this encounter convey to me or about me? So if I were just using the Playboy example, I would fill out columns 1 and 4 for that one. But if it was a person that I had, my first boyfriend that I had sex with, why did the sexual encounter occur with this person? I would have to answer that. Did I use this sex with this person to get or gain something? Did I need to keep him? Like have sex in order to keep him? Like he would leave me for another girl or something? Or I didn't even know. Like I didn't even think about it. What did this encounter convey to me about me? Looking back, it's different than actually being in the moment of that. But if I could take myself back to being 17, 20, 32, like if I could take myself back to these moments of any kind of encounter that I had and answer these questions now, looking back, and even recently, like what is it about certain things that, like Talene and I can be watching certain shows or movies, and there is a very specific type of like sex scenes that I just literally feel nauseous about. And not because I've never been molested, I've never been sexually abused, but those would be on here for another person that is true for. And so you list those because it matters. It's part of your sexual history. It's part of what has painted the world that you live in under that umbrella of your sexual history. And you want that to be on here so that because it matters. It all matters. Compare this list to your other lists, specifically both lists of your hurts, which we're about to get to. Ask God to correct your thoughts about sex and sexuality and to heal the places you're hurting due to this list. Whatever is on this list, you have some deep wounds from it, most likely. So that's number 3, list number 3. List number 4 is our hurts given. You have hurt people. Some of the wounds you've inflicted you know about and are conscious of, and some of them you are not. Who, how, why, and when you've hurt others matters. It will help your healing process and level of self-awareness by making this painful list. And if you're feeling brave, ask people around you if or how you've hurt them. That's very scary to do. So you don't know all the ways. We don't know all the ways we've hurt people. You can't. But we have some knowledge. Like I know some people I've hurt and how I've hurt them. And these 2 lists, in my opinion, if you do no other list except these last 2, the hurts given and hurts taken, to me they are the most important because all of these things on these other previous 3 lists will actually be reflected in this list somehow, these 2 lists. So on your inventory of hurts given, the first column is, who did you hurt? Person or institution, be specific. So if it was an individual, if it was your parents, if it was a group of people, your family, coworkers, a job, a school, your bank, maybe you stole from them. It can be people or an institution. So who did you hurt? Again, we're keeping it simple. It's just, we're not explaining it was my mom's dad and where was it? Okay, it was just your uncle. Okay, like it was your grandpa. Like just, we keep it short. The next column, when did the hurt occur? So was it a life event or just a moment? Briefly describe the when of the hurt. When did you do this? When did you hurt your parents? When was it? And it can be multiple times that you've hurt the same, person or persons or institution. What was the hurtful action? Name the hurt. Briefly describe the what of the hurt. What was it? What did you do? How did you damage? So this is, how did you do damage? So this one is very important because this makes you really think through how you hurt somebody. So in this column, all you're going to do is write the numbers that correspond to the way that you've hurt them. So if it were, say I had my parents on this list, and I said, okay, it was my parents. And when did the hurt occur? Christmas 2005. And what was the hurtful action? I showed up drunk to Christmas and ruined it. This is not a true story, but I'm just saying we don't know what this could be. How did I hurt my parents? Socially, they had friends over, so I'm going to put a number 1. Relationally, definitely, so I'm going to put a number 2 because I damaged my relationship with them. 3, financially, I would say I'm not going to put that because I didn't hurt them financially. 4, sexually, I didn't hurt them sexually, so I'm not going to put a number 4. 5, mentally, did I hurt them mentally? Yeah, I'm going to put that because I really caused them a lot of grief, and they were worried about me, and it was a lot of mental stress. 6, emotionally, definitely I'm going to put a number 6. I emotionally did damage to them. 7, physically, didn't, so I'm not going to put that. 8, spiritually, maybe not. So, but maybe so. Maybe they've been praying for me to stop drinking and not come to another holiday drunk, and they're starting to kind of give up on God because I just keep, staying in my rut. So maybe what I did hurt them spiritually in some way. So you put the numbers that correspond to your hurt, whatever that might be, to your knowledge. The next column, how often do you think about it? On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being never. So even if you never really think of this instance, you still put it on the list. It's a hurt given. So you're either going to go in the easiest way that I can share to do any of these lists is chronologically. If you start in the present and you go backwards, or you go to your earliest memory of the first time that you ever hurt somebody, or the earliest angry moment that you can think of, or your sexual history, like the first time you ever thought about anything that had to do with sex. Either go forward or backwards. Usually those, if you do it that way chronologically, it'll trigger more memories because that's how your mind works. So it'll work chronologically and go, yeah, and then this, and then this, and then this. Like it'll kind of take you down the road, and memories will be connected. Doesn't mean that you have to do it that way. If today you wake up and you have like 5 memories that are just like boom, 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 and they're just completely all over the calendar and unrelated, doesn't matter. These are just ways that it might help you to start from present and go backwards. You do it however it comes out. There's no right or wrong way to do this. That's just a helpful tip. So how often do you think about it? Scale of 1 to 5, 1 being never, 5 being I can't not think about it. I think about it all the time. Think about it constantly. Every day I think about it. That's a 5. So you want to acknowledge how much you actually think about this the way you've hurt somebody. The last column, peace about it. Peace is just reconciliation, not meaning active relationship with a person that you've hurt. That's not what reconciliation means. If Beth and I get in a big old fight and we had a knockdown, drag out, and she's here on my list, and we're best friends now, and that means, it's a 5, we have peace. That's not what that means. Beth and I could have made up, and we have an active friendship, and I could still have no peace about it. There could be no reconciliation in my insides about it, like in my heart and my mind. Like I could still feel not peaceful about it, even though the relationship is reactivated. So reconciliation does not necessarily mean reactivating a relationship. That's not what that means. Reconciliation is just like with God. Jesus has reconciled us to God. He has made peace between us and God. Do we always act like we have peace with God? Absolutely not. Do I always feel the peace? that I actually have reconciliation with God? Absolutely not. Most days it's a 1, being no peace. Like I am reconciled to God, actually, but I don't always feel the peace that actually is there. It's valid, it's there, right? I can't make myself just feel peace about it, even though that's completely true. We know that that is 100% true. We are 100% reconciled to God. Why don't we feel peace about it? Because we're broken. We're shattered people. We have faulty emotions. We have faulty mental capacities. We have limitations in our ability to believe that we actually are reconciled to God in the way that he tells us that we are. So that could be true with a relationship, with a person that you've hurt. You could have already said amends and be sorry, and you could have, we don't hang out, but we're fine. How do you feel about it? This is about what your peace is, not what they think, now that you've apologized or whatever, if you in fact have. What do you have peace about it? And honestly, I could write out a hurt, and today I could have peace about it. But next week or like in 2 months, something may happen in general in a day, and all of a sudden that specific instance, I don't feel good about anymore. I don't feel like I'm scared that I don't have any peace with that. I don't feel good about that. So there's no right or wrong answer. The correct answer is what you're saying. Whatever you say is the correct answer. If you're being honest, that's what we're trying to get at here, right? You want to be honest with yourself, because these are only for you. I mean, we'll get to who you could possibly share it with later, but they're for you. List number 5 to me will be your largest list, because you know these the best. This is usually the biggest list of all the lists, and you know this list very well. You live from most of what is on this list in one way or another, for better or for worse. Sometimes our hurts that are on our list may have made us resilient and stronger in some area and avoid certain things. But for better or for worse, we live most of our lives from this list of hurt. Like how we operate daily is we are trying to, I got a limp over here because of this hurt, and this is over here, this shoulder's bad because of that hurt. We have these different issues, right, inside and outside because of different hurts. And so how are we kind of, disfiguring ourselves or adjusting and walking with a limp, for lack of a better term, is usually because of what's on this list. This list specifically beckons you to chronologically list your hurts in the order you received them. It begs you to look the hurt in the eye and gives you an opportunity to think about it more clearly. Your hurt matters. It is, sadly, your most abundant resource. What can God do with this deep well of pain that you have, this resource of hurt? It is in and for our wounds that we need a healer. We are more likely to heal in hurting areas when we are honest about the hurt and honest with ourselves about what it has done in and to our lives. So I am a huge believer in this list specifically, not in the vein of a victim mentality, but in order to take stock of why I actually have these behaviors and patterns that I do, because they are most likely linked to some way that I have been hurt, and so now I become a people pleaser. Some way that I've been rejected, and now I do something to be in, to be liked, to be validated or accepted. If we've been left out, if we've been actually physically abused, maybe we are very timid. Whatever our hurts are, none of them are invalid. They all matter. So even if you have a hurt that you think should go on here and you're like, but my dad, he's never admitted that. He won't ever admit that. Every time I tried to bring it up to mom, she acts like it never happened. It goes on the list. If you have a hurt, it goes on the list. This is pretty much like the list before it. It's just pointing to a different direction. Who hurt you? Was it a person or an institution? I had the legal system on here for several different episodes in my own life because it really did hurt me. When did your hurt occur? Again, it could be a life event or a moment. Briefly describe the when of the hurt. The third column, what was the hurtful action? Name the hurt. Naming the hurt is a big deal. Like that sounds so simple, but naming the hurt is actually writing out a way that is naming it is therapeutic in and of itself. How were you damaged? You list the numbers that are appropriate for your damage. And one hurt could be all 8 numbers. All 8 of them could be attributed to one hurt. How often do you think about it? On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being never. Peace about it? Question mark. Scale of 1 to 5, 1 being no peace. That's important that you acknowledge, do I have peace about that? Do I feel like, at peace, reconciled about this? It's reconciled inside of me to a degree that I can cope with it well on a daily basis. So that list, like I said, for me, encompasses typically all 4 of these. Almost every single thing you write on these 4 will be somewhere on this, somehow. Maybe not in the same way, but maybe exactly the same way. But almost everything on these is on here in some form. That's why I think this one is so important. And the other thing I'm going to go back to is that our wounds, our hurts, are one of our biggest resources that we have. Right? You might have a great personality, you're very talented, you have a lot of skill sets that you can share with people. Those are all resources. But everybody, Christian or not Christian, every color, every gender, every human hurts. Everybody hurts. And when we steward our scars well and in a way that is a resource, that's where people actually connect on a level that really starts to get somewhere, right? Like that's to me, the real Me Too movement. Like, you hurt there, I do too. I hurt that way. I've hurt that way. That's where you feel like a soul tied to somebody. Like, that thing didn't exactly happen to me, but I get that. Hurt is universal. It's absolutely universal. So to steward your scars, your wounds well, is the same thing that Jesus was talking about. I mean, he is the wounded healer. How he stewarded his scars are to be merciful and forgiving and a rescuer, a healer, a savior to us. By his wounds we are healed. So that is true when we believe that, and the deeper that is pressed into us, so it is true when we do that with each other, right? And so one of the rules of thumb that is a good one to take into consideration, there are, I think our day and age, just probably like the last 10 years for sure, because of the internet and social media and blogs and just like everything, people just kind of bleed all over everybody all the time, for lack of a better term. And one of Tullian's friends, it's a female actually, who's a pastor, she's a Lutheran pastor in Colorado. She said, speak from your scars, not from your wounds, which is great insight, because when we are bleeding uncontrollably in some area of pain, we're of no use to anybody else. If you pictured all of us are in a hospital all the time, the whole world is, all of us humans are in a hospital all the time. And we go from room to room in different areas, and depending on what day it is and what issue it is and how we are today, right? What season of life we're in. And if you are in the emergency room or in ICU because of a devastating issue, a devastating hurt that you have endured. I just found out my husband is having an affair. My brother committed suicide. My sister's baby died. Like I have nothing to give other people. I need care administered to me in the emergency room. I need to be stabilized. And that means I should not be spewing over everybody else. I am not of any help at that moment to anybody else. If I'm in ICU and I'm on life support here, like I'm just trying to make it through the day here, through the moment to moment. And you've had a crisis that you felt this before. You know how that feels. You don't have the bandwidth to help other people. But there are some people, because of like our, day and age of technology, they take to like healing themselves look like to some degree bleeding over everybody else. And that can be detrimental because it can fuel stuff in them that's not really good. And it can give them, like I was saying, like a victim mentality in some ways, and that doesn't help us. Although there are I'm not saying there are not true victims, because there absolutely are. And you need that to be validated in you and for you, for your healing. But we want to speak from our scars, not our wounds. Once we are healed, once God has healed us in an area, so that when then I share, I have a scar from that same kind of thing. And you know what helped me? Blah, 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 blah. And I'm a little bit tougher in this spot now than I was before, and you will be too. You'll feel a little stronger right here next time or later. I know it doesn't seem like you will, but you will. I promise, it'll heal. That's encouraging, but we don't want to bleed on people, right? And so that can be sometimes a little confusing. Now, it does not mean if I'm freaking losing my mind that I can't call somebody that's trusting and I'm saying, I need help, I need somebody to stabilize me. But that person cannot administer help to somebody. And like I am asking for help in those moments. And so we want to be careful to speak from our scars, not from our wounds, to within our hurts, to not bleed on everybody, because other people are not everybody is equipped to handle our bleeding. God may put some people in your space in there to be like, well, you know what? She's been through that, so I'm going to send her in, Stacie, to take care of you in that area, to administer some help to you in that area. And that's part of what I'm talking about with our stewarding our scars. And so in order to do that, we need to make this list so that we know what those are, and so that we can establish, where am I actually scarred over? Because those are the places that you'll say, I have peace in that one. The ones where you don't, and you're like, there's no peace, I think about it all the time. You might be in an emergency room or ICU, and if you've gone through any kind of rehab of any kind physically, after some broken bone or, accident or whatever, rehab is not easy. It's not comfortable. You do weird things in weird ways that you're like, how in the world is this working? Like, this doesn't even make any sense. How is this going to make my ankle work again? But then nonetheless, it's like, oh, it actually worked. Same thing is true with this. It doesn't seem like filling out these charts would just help, but it's part of the rehab of recovery. It's part of how we are recovered by God. This is therapeutic, so it helps us in those ways. And there's so many ways that these lists can help us that I can't emphasize enough how important they are. And like, I'm 51. The first time I did any inventory list, I was 31, so 20 years ago, and I had not done any before that point. So I had 30 years to inventory, and that was a lot then. And I keep doing them, and I keep putting the same things on my list. I put new things on my list because there are new hurts I'm dishing out and new ones that I'm taking. And there are new fears and there are old fears, and there are things that go on my sexual history list, and there are things that go on my anger list. I'm mad at new people. I'm, still angry at the old ones. So our inventories are never complete. It's very important to remind yourselves of. You're never going to complete it. We're constantly creating new inventory. Life is just constant new inventory. It doesn't stop. And so some recovery systems can really make you feel like you have to complete it, get from here to here, and you need this much of it. That is not the case. God is in charge of whatever pace he wants to bring you to these lists to. And if he starts doing it tonight and your mind's already rolling right now, that's his business. If you don't look at these lists again until next year, that's when God has you ready to do it. Like, this is not, well, gosh, look at her list. Like, she wrote like 3 pages. Like, how'd she do that? It's been 1 week. We can feel very ashamed or competitive or jealous or something because somebody else's inventory looks different than ours. This is not about anybody else's inventory at all. Do not compare your inventory to anybody else's in that sense. There is no timeline for it. There is no wrong or right way to do it. I just encourage you to trust God to do it with you. You will put pen to paper, but he will do the writing of this. It is his job to get it out of you, what he wants to bring to the surface so that you can look at it.